Welcome to episode 20 of the Saturday Morning Gaming Show, the retro podcast where we choose one game an episode and share our experiences. Title screen to credits. On today's episode, I'm playing through Dungeon Keeper with my good friends Lobos and Alamaxia. So without further ado, let's get started. Hello everyone, and welcome. It is July 18th, 2020, and I'm your co-host, the Fat Wizard, joined today by...
Alamaxia.
And Lobos.
And today we're taking a look at Dungeon Keeper, released in 1997 on the PC. So I think we have a new Dungeon Keeper initiate to the program here, Lobos, and that happens to be Alamaxia, correct?
There was so much pain.
And
it's such a good game.
I want to hear Alamaxia because, Lobos and I have both played this in our formative younger years. And so I'm real curious to hear about how the game holds up if you're coming into it for the first time.
I will say that this game holds up incredibly well. It had some mechanics that I did not expect in a game like this. When I looked at it, I was reading, it's like a godlike game. It's kind of RTS, and I did not expect the depth that this game has. And I can't really think of very many games I've played like this that just give you so many different options and ways to approach the level and really design the level as you're playing it. It's a game that I didn't get all the way through, but I'm going to go back and finish it.
Yeah, so that's good. So it sounds like you did enjoy your time with it. Lobos, as what I would consider the resident expert, the resident keeper, maybe you could walk us through a little bit about how this game works.
Oh, Dungeon Keeper. It, at its core, it's a dungeon builder where generally there's basically a campaign you play through, and each level you'll start with a certain amount of resources and kind of your base builder creatures, which are known as imps, or your digging creatures. And they allow you to dig out through the dungeon that you're building. Normally there's either an enemy dungeon keeper that you need to take out, or two or three, or there are the heroes, which are like the humans, which are filthy and disgusting and you need to take care of because, well, evil needs to reign throughout the land. But generally, you'll build different types of rooms. For example, a room where creatures can sleep, room where creatures can eat, where they can train, where they can study. And not all creatures will do all activities, but based on your dungeon layout, that will attract creatures to your dungeon. And they're not completely directly controllable like in a typical RTS. It's more of an AI, kind of like The Sims, where once they're in their dungeon, they're going to do whatever they want unless you explicitly tell them to do something else. And if enemies come by, they're going to attack them and this and that. But it's a little bit harder to control them, and you also got to keep them happy. But I don't want to take up the whole show because I will literally talk the entire hour. So I'll stop talking right now.
Let's talk a little bit about how the game actually starts. It's one of those real low quality CGI, which absolutely adore.
It's so good.
I love it. and it basically shows a hero, and maybe it's a little bit ambiguous as if the hero is your character in the game initially, because he's going through the dungeon and he is killing goblins, and I think traditionally you'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna be that hero and killing all those guys. And then it kind of shifts, and it brings in some real meaty ones. We see a bile demon, who is this very, very large red demon with, on either of its horns has these mace hanging from them. And he is distracting them. He points at the avatar, and he's like, "You and me." And meanwhile, behind him, sneaking up, is a horned reaper, which is sort of the identical, or the icon of the game, the iconical character, mascot, yeah. And the horned reaper is sort of this half goat, half man creature with two horns, like a nose ring, and its weapon is this scythe, and it uses a scythe to lop off the head of the hero. And that's my first introduction to Dungeon Keeper. And I was like, this is really interesting because I couldn't think. I was really hard pressed to think. I didn't do any research, but I was really hard pressed to find games that came before this that had the same idea of like, hey, you're what might be called the bad guy here. So I thought that was a really cool shift. Once you start the first game, once you start the game, you are presented a map, and it has a really cool narrator.
Yeah.
And you look at, and he always narrates the next level. So the first level is Ever Smile, and he says something like, Ever Smile, where the flowers always bloom and the butterflies always, he makes up stuff like that. And then he'll be like, he'll add his personal commentary, and it will say like, and it's disgusting or something like that.
Yeah. I love it.
You jump into that level, and the first level is actually pretty easy. It gives you some tooltips, and what you're tasked with is basically building out the beginning of your base. And this more or less for all 20 levels kind of start out the same way. You've got a couple different rooms that you'll need to build. There is they call it a lair, right? That's where the monsters sleep. So there's a lair, there's a hatchery. That's essentially what feeds the monsters. There's a treasure room, and that is a place where your imps, your little minions, will mine gold and then deposit it, and then you can use that to pay off your creatures or train them or further build out your dungeon. And so each of the levels starts with building those three things. And again, that's always the same. You always start that foundation, and then you will claim, your imps will actually claim once they're directed to, or once they have access to it, they'll claim what do they call it? The summoning?
The portal. It's just called a portal.
Yeah. Yeah, and so based on the level, the portal will at certain frequencies, I guess, award you a new creature. I guess that we could say, grant you a new creature based on your dungeon type. And so, Lobos, maybe you could talk about some of the requirements for a couple of the creatures to actually join your dungeon.
Yeah, so there specifically, it's more than just that you have to have certain rooms. The sizes of the rooms also matters. So, for example, the Bile Demon is this big, fat demon who farts on everybody and shoots poison gas. He eats a lot. So it's not just enough to have a hatchery, but you need to have at least 25 hatchery tiles. So I always build a 5x5. And I think that's the maximum for any sort of room requirement. So my default is to just make 5x5 rooms of whatever I'm building. And sometimes it might be a little bit more cost, but it's never going to set you so far back that you can't recover or anything. But there's a ton of room types that have their own purposes. You can imprison enemies that you take down in a prison. And then if you choose to, you can build a torture chamber, and you can torture people that you've imprisoned, and you can convert them to your side. You can learn more information from the enemy, like it reveals map. Or sometimes they'll die and they'll turn into a ghost. Or if they die in the prison, they turn into a skeleton. And these are all creatures that you get. And along with that, for example, the torture chamber will lure dark mistresses, which are a very, very strong creature that you can use. She loves the torture chamber, and it actually increases her happiness to be tortured. She's kind of a sadistic one, that.
Yeah, you talked about happiness. I think it's worth mentioning just the real depth of this. So this game was made by, I'm trying to remember. It was Peter Molyneux.
Yes.
And so he is famous for a lot of these God games, and this is kind of one of them. So he worked on like the Populous, the Theme Park, Black and White, and so Dungeon Keeper. It's interesting because I'm not sure if Alamaxia, if you notice this, but you can use what they call a query tool. It's basically a question mark, and you can hover over any one of your minions, and you can look at a detailed breakdown of like how happy they are, what their hit points are, what their blood type is.
As far
as I know,
I did not
blood
see
type
any of
is
that
not
detail until I watched a little bit of Lobos' stream. There was a lot of what I was watching even today that I was going, I didn't know that was a thing. So,
and as far as I know, blood type is a worthless stat.
I think
That's
it
just
is.
like a little bit of lore.
Yeah, it's
right?
just
but
flavor,
it's so
really.
cool. That's so cool.
Yeah, and so each of your minions has their own wants and their own needs, and you can accommodate them if you wish by giving them some little chickens. Those come from the hatchery, and they're used as your sustenance. You can also drop some gold on them. You can also slap them because you are basically like an overlord, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your avatar in the game is essentially just a diabolical hand that picks up creatures and throws creatures down and slaps them around. And when you slap them, they actually generally move around a little bit quicker at the expense of a little bit of health. Some of the creatures can get annoyed, and then if they get really annoyed, they'll actually start destroying your dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really cool to see, although I wouldn't really consider this a core gameplay element or something you would even use to min-max your gameplay, but it is kind of cool to see the detail in the personality of every single creature that you have control of or that is in your dungeon.
Yeah, I would say that you could even get attached to some of your particular monsters, and I have, certainly, because you can even, every single one has a randomly generated name. And so if you decide that, okay, I want one imp to be really good, so I'm just going to train that one imp and get him to level 10, which is the maximum level, by the way. And creatures will acquire more abilities as they level up. And for example, the imp, when it hits level 10, earns teleport, which allows it to literally just teleport anywhere on the map. So if it's got no instructions and suddenly you tag some dirt on the opposite side of the level, he'll just teleport over and just start digging it out for you.
Holy cow.
And so at that point, you might be like, all right, what's this guy's name? Oh, his name is Phlebas, the imp. Nice. Well, I hope Phlebas does well. And then later on in the level, maybe you lost Phlebas. Maybe you have multiple level 10s, but Phlebas was your first one. And now
He's always the first. Yeah, I
now
always
Phlebas
remember
is
your-
gone. And I can't believe it.
Or Phlebas.
Let's talk a little bit about training, because that is a main part of this game. Is honestly there's sort of, I'd say there's about 3 stages to every level. There is sort of the acquisition or building part where you're building your dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, you hit a spot where you're like, all right, this dungeon is fully constructed. You may make some modifications here or there to bolster your defenses or increase the size of your rooms, but for the most part, you've laid out your dungeon. The second stage is just training up your creatures, because eventually you're going to go out and fight something. And so a lot of this stage is just you throwing your creatures into a training room, which is comically like these almost like if you think of like a Mario game where they have these rolling pins with spikes on them that are coming towards you and you have to dodge them. It's basically one of those, but they're rotating vertically, and so the enemies are kind of like duking and jiving under those blades as they're hitting them back. And then there's the third stage, which is the annihilation, which is traditionally you pick up all your enemies, or you pick up all your minions and you just drop them in front of the enemy, and then you hope that your creatures are more powerful.
Ooh. And on that note, I think we should talk about combat a bit, because generally everything is AI controlled. You'll dump a bunch of minions on top of enemies, and they just go to town. And when there's a combat going on, there's a special little pop-up menu you can expand that shows you little icons of all of the minions on your side and all of the minions that they're fighting against. And from there, you can see their individual health bars. And if you need to, you can pluck them from that screen, which is very handy in, maybe your high-level tank bile demon who's been at the forefront the whole time is about to die. You can just pick him up, and then you can drop him in the lair, let him sleep, recover, and the rest of the minions will keep on fighting. But one of my favorite things with older games in general, and it's very much the case here, is that all of the audio from every creature pretty much stacks on top of itself. So you just get this chaotic mass of screaming and spells exploding, and it looks like a mess, but it's I feel like it's a valid depiction of what the combat would be. Like, if you were there would be a ton of people shooting spells and yelling at each other, probably.
And not only that, but you also have I don't know if it's like a voice that I'm not sure who this voice is that relates or relays the status of your your dungeon to you. But there's also a voice that, think of like like StarCrafters, like, you need more pylons,
right,
that type of thing. So he'll constantly tell you, like, your minions need more food or stuff like that. And one of the lines is, your minions are dying, or your creatures are dying, or something like that. And so, like, meanwhile, you hear all the shouts and the screams, and you're like, okay, I got to pick up this one. And then this narrator is also telling you your creatures are under attack, your minions are dying, and it's like, it's very frantic. Like,
there are a lot of times
when you traditionally.
There are a lot of times the narrator will be yelling at you, your creatures are dying, and you're going, I don't know where they're dying.
Exactly. I guess when you traditionally think of God games, I think of kind of something a little bit more slower, a little bit more methodical, maybe some more planning. But I do feel like, in terms of those style of games, this one can be very hectic, and there's a lot of stuff to be doing all at once.
And that's really what threw me off, was the hecticness of it, because I guess you put into words what I couldn't there. Is I was expecting it to be that more slow, methodical, godlike, not when I got to the mid levels, constantly going, where are these things coming from? It's very
one
chaotic.
One of the important things that they teach you early on is about the fortification of your dungeon. So once you've dug out your rooms, once your imps have kind of finished their tasks, they'll wander around your dungeon and do a little dance on the walls of your dungeon, and that'll fortify it, which means that if there's an enemy that's digging around, they won't actually be able to dig through your walls, and you're safe. As long as all your walls are fortified, then the enemies cannot dig in. So you can just take your time, you can train up and all that. At some point, maybe level 5 or 6, suddenly they very quickly move on you, and if you are not prepped and ready and fortified up, they'll just bust right in, and it becomes a mess, because maybe you don't even have any creatures yet because you've just been focusing on building, so you're just out of luck. And so you usually have to retry if a level doesn't turn out the way that you wanted it to.
Yeah, and sometimes those fortifications can be tricky, because often what you'll do is, again, you start the game and you kind of be like, all right, I have a nice big dungeon here, nice big training area over here. And then you hear the dreaded, your minions have tunneled into a new area. And that is when you know that you have screwed up building your dungeon, because you have basically exposed your dungeon to something that is often impossible to fortify, because it will usually be like, oh, there's no walls here to actually fortify because it's a big pit of lava, or the enemy has already been here. And so, there's certainly been times where I start out the game and I'm like, oh, I tunneled into an area. Better restart and make sure I don't go that way anymore.
It's kind of level that there's one level I know it killed me a few times. I tunneled through one wall of gold, and there was a bunch of harpies there that wiped my base, and I was okay, don't go that way. Go this way. And I tunneled through this wall of gold, and there was a bunch of barbarians there, and I was like, God, don't go that way. So
it's sometimes it's a process of discovery. Often what I would do when I start a level, you can sort of see the resources the game has sort of planned for you to have. And so often what I would do is I would dig around those resources, or otherwise try to find the choke points and try to build, dig that, reinforce that right away. And then once you've reinforced those choke points, you can pretty much dig all the way around in that area you've reinforced without having to worry about the enemy coming down and breaking into your dungeon.
One of my favorite things on the same subject is there's a map that you can click in the top left, and it gives you a cursor you can mouse over, and it'll show you like a little preview, a very kind of low, just very pixelated representation of where you're pointing. So if you mouse over like your training room, you'll see the icons of your creatures moving around. It's not the 3D model, but just a little painted icon, and you can hear them training and this and that. But if you're mousing over the map before you've discovered it, you can hear sometimes like, oh, I can hear the enemy keeper and his minions are digging out stuff here. Or I can hear footsteps, which might be enemies waiting for me to dig to them. Or it might be neutral creatures, which when you encounter a neutral creature will actually join your side. So there's a lot of trial and error, but luckily you can save at any point in the game. So you can say, well, I'm going to see if these are friendly creatures, dig to them, and then reload if it doesn't turn out your way.
Yeah, I think we just completed one of the levels. I think it was Lush Meadow on down. And this was a level that introduces you to the Biodemon because, you dig and you find there's a big lava pit. And then in the very center of that lava pit is a prison that has a neutral Biodemon. And, you basically can just pick him up and move him to your dungeon, which is a little weird. I actually thought I had to build a bridge to the prison, but it's not the case. But yeah, that's a good example of like being able to just get a neutral creature. And then I was like, great, I got a Biodemon. And Biodemons love to train, which is great because they're very strong if they train to a high enough level. And it also reminds me of the way that you actually build your levels actually really influences the speed and training. So there's a couple of different things. There's how you place rooms next to each other. For instance, monsters got to eat and monsters got to sleep and monsters want to get paid. Mm-hmm. And so let's say you want to maximize your training time. It's wise to put all those areas around the training ground. So it's like, all right, during payday, you got to go collect your cash. Hey, look, it's next door. Hey, you're hungry? There you go. There's an exit for you right there.
Yeah.
And they physically have to walk there. And so let's say that you've got your training on one side of the area and then your hatchery on the other and then sleeping on the other. It's, that's super inefficient. And so it's really fun to sort of play and try to maximize the efficiency of the rooms. And so that's one way is just the placement. The other is there's sort of, I think it's actually hidden, but there is a way that the game tracks how efficient the room itself is.
Mm-hmm. There's an efficiency meter on the rooms. When you mouse over a room, a little flag pops up. There are 3 bars. Red is health. That only affects like whether one of your creatures is destroying your own rooms because they're mad, or if the enemy is taking over your room with one of their imps because they can take over your rooms. Then there's the green, which is how much capacity it has. So whether the room is full, and then I believe white is the efficiency bar on there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right. And the way that the efficiency is dictated is, and it's really cool because it sort of matches the way that you feel like you should build. In that every room should have more or less 4 walls, because you could, let's say that you didn't care about the aesthetic of your dungeon and you're just like, hey, why don't we just, remove every single wall here and just throw everything on one giant, like open office space plan.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
you've got everything there. That actually makes the rooms less efficient. And that means like, they have to train 20% longer to get a level up. And I thought that was really cool. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of like, it's like your aesthetics actually match the functionality of the room. But the way that it's calculated is if you have more or less walls surrounding, they have to be actually like, we'll call them dirt walls, the ones that you can dig in. Because there's another type of wall, there's impenetrable wall, which is like a rock. Those actually don't confer any sort of bonus. So what you want to do is dig with basically one entrance in and one entrance out, or actually the same, one entrance in and out, and to maximize the amount of dirt walls around your little room. And so after that happens, then your imps can reinforce the walls, and once you've reinforced it, it's essentially got maximum efficiency. And so, you want to throw down your imps, let them reinforce the walls, especially in your training room.
So you still want to make sure you add doors, and if you don't have doors in between, you can even throw up, I think there are the guard posts. And I think if you throw guard posts in the doors, that'll even increase the efficiency.
Okay, cool.
So that is true. Now, I will say, Alamaxia and Lobos, because you folks were trying to stream some of this, I think you guys weren't playing with the Keeper FX mod. I was playing with the Keeper FX mod. And so folks that are wanting to, let's say that you hear about all this great stuff and you want to check out Dungeon Keeper, we do recommend you check out the Dungeon Keeper FX mod. It makes it a lot easier on the eyes, especially for resolution. But they do change a couple things. And that is one of those is they doors and guard posts do not actually confer efficiency bonuses anymore.
Oh.
Because I think what was happening is people would just they would instead of having walls, they would just like surround it with guard posts.
Ah, okay.
So I think Keeper FX kind of like tried to balance stuff out or like remove some of the bugs or whatever. Another thing they did, and we haven't got to this yet, but we'll talk about it a little bit later, is there's a temple, and the temple you can use to sacrifice creatures, and there are certain formulas that give you certain benefits, and the Keeper FX mod actually changed all those formulas, which I'm not quite sure why they did that, but yeah. So we have had a little bit of different experiences in the game, but I would say they're pretty minor.
Now, did either of you use the computer assist? That's something we haven't talked about. There is a computer assist in this where you can have the AI of the game assist you in actually either building out your dungeon or moving around your your actual creatures for you, or
is that the
something in between?
Yes, the C button. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because I clicked on it a couple times, and then I would notice a bunch of paths would be marked for mining. And I always thought that I messed up something because I'm like, wait, why is this? Okay, I'll just uncheck those for being mining.
Okay, so what it is what happens is by default they have it set a little too high. There's 4 different levels of AI assist that you can have. It's just Discord. We'll cut this part out. It's 4 different levels you can have. The lowest level is where it will only move your mobs for you. Where it'll only move your mobs for you. Where if you were to be attacked by an enemy when you're out exploring, all of a sudden every single one of your creatures that can attack are placed right down on top of that imp. So if your imp's out exploring a hallway, your entire army is placed on them for you. But if you move,
so you're saying that if you get attacked, the computer will throw all your minions to assist your creatures that are being attacked?
Yes, as long as they're on a square where you can drop them, like it's a square that you've taken control of, then it will move everyone there, and it will also take care of moving them around for their own happiness. So if they're like, I really want to go to the library instead of training, your dragon or your wizard is going to move around that way. But if you adjust that
would have been useful, because I definitely ran into issues where you can only pick up 8 creatures at once, and often you're working with army sizes like 25 creatures, so. The computer is a lot easier. They're a lot more dexterous and can pick up all their creatures and throw them down. But I'm picking up and throwing down 8 at a time, and so I always I'm a little weary of the opening wave I put down there. I'm like, you guys are probably gonna die before the reinforcements come. Good luck.
Right. Yeah, and with that and that is actually why I use that, is because I couldn't manage my creatures quick enough. I was losing half my army before I could get them out.
Yeah, I will say that if you really train your creatures up, I think the first maybe 10 levels, you probably don't need to get them up to level 10. But yeah, once you start getting up there, you definitely want to hit at least a couple of your creatures at level 10, because the level differences are amazing. Like I've seen imagine 4 or 5 level 1 creatures will not even dent a level 5 creature.
Yeah.
And a level 5 creature is just so strong. So they definitely get powerful as they get rise in the ranks. And especially because, Lobos, you said you get new abilities. And one of the abilities, imagine a wizard. We'll take them as an example. I'm not sure what level it is. Maybe it's like level 4 or 5. They get the ability to just heal themselves.
Yeah.
Right, so not only not only do you have to worry about still damaging them to kill them, actually, like hitting them to kill them, but now you have to be able to damage them faster than they can heal themselves.
Yeah.
And like the mistress at one of I want to say like level 6, she gets this lightning bolt.
Oh, yeah.
Which just allows you to shoot from super far away, and they're annoying because what they'll do is they'll shoot with their lightning bolts, and then they'll back up, turn around, and shoot you again. They'll basically kite enemies.
Yeah, the AI
It's
is very good at kiting. And with the Mistress in particular, she also gets Drain Life spell. So she'll just alternate between lightning and Drain Life, and it heals her, and the lightning does a ton of damage. And they get speed, so they're already faster. They're crazy good. Crazy good.
Man, I could talk all day about the creatures because they're so fun, and the spells are great. I think there's on the other side, so the hero side, there's like a wizard, or I think it's maybe a fairy. And in any case, it actually has this like gust of wind spell.
Oh, that's the priestess. Yeah.
Oh, it's the priestess.
It's the worst.
So a lot of times what you do is you throw all your enemies you throw all your minions into the combat, and they just like blow them all off to the side of the wall, and now they're all bunched up, and you're like, oh no.
And a lot of times, so what I did in one of the later levels was actually convert a priestess to my side. And you think that's all great and everything, but then your priestess will, when it gets in combat, it blows all of the enemies away, and then she gets out of combat and just leaves. And it's like, well, I want you to fight them. Stop it. It's it can be aggravating, but there are some really cool like weaknesses and strengths between those enemy types. For example, the bile demons, they're way too big. They're just so heavy, they don't get blown away. So if I see a priestess, I'm just immediately dumping bile demons on him. And she's also, I think she's weaker to physical because she's like a spellcaster, and they'll just walk up and bash her, and they'll take care of her real fast.
That's a really good strategy. I think it's worth going back and revisiting the temperament of the creatures, because what you said is so true. Is the creatures have a very short attention span. They have to literally be being punched in the face for them to want to engage with combat, because many times there's enemies and I can't quite get to them. Imagine there's like a small pit of lava, which, by the way, your creatures will walk through. If there's a reason to walk through the lava, they will. Or like water, a better example, like walking through the water. And so what you'll do is you're like, all right, well, I can't reach this area, but I have a bridge that reaches within like 3 or 4 tiles. So I'm going to throw down all my creatures 3 or 4 tiles away and hope that they engage. And maybe one of them does, and like the rest of the 7 are like, oh, I could go for a sandwich now. I'm going to walk back. It's like, okay, guys, go over here. And so the game does give you some abilities to sort of force that. And I wanted to pick your brain, both Alamaxia and Lobos, about the spell Call to Arms. So we'll talk about spells after this, but let's talk about one of the spells you can use is a flag you plant in the ground. And what's supposed to do is attract your minions there, is basically say, hey, minions, please go over here and just kind of hang around this area. Yeah. But they seemed like they needed to have that like in their vision to actually walk there. If you just threw it off somewhere else, they're like, I don't care.
Yeah. So the way Call to Arms works is if you just click to cast a spell, again, I think spells have a big section we need to talk about. But Call to Arms costs anywhere between 1 and 9 gold, basically per second, and probably more than that. And the more, if you click and hold the spell, it will cost more, but also have a greater effect. And the radius at which Call to Arms will affect the creatures is larger on the larger cost. But if you have it active, it's basically a toggle. And if you toggle it on at the highest cost, your gold just plummets while it's happening. So unless you're in really good gold shape, or you just desperately need them to run to the dungeon heart of the enemy or whatever, it's something I only use in very specific cases when I need them to get there and I can't like claim my way there or build bridges or something.
Now, it would only actually drain your gold if you were using it in the enemy's territory, right? If you cast it in territory you owned, then it wouldn't have any kind of drain.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense. I never use it in my own territory, but that totally makes sense.
Huh. Yeah, so you could kind of use that as a guard post. So I didn't realize that you could click to hold to increase the spell, which might have made things easier, especially as some of the abilities are like healing. So
Wait, you did? It's because Alamaxia also didn't know this. And the lightning spell, if you click and hold, is absurd. It will 2 to 3 shot like level 5 like enemies. And
that would have saved
and you
me
can,
so
I was
many
like,
times.
I think we need to now dive into spells. So
Yes.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about. Why don't you talk about how the spells operate here, and then we'll talk about how you get new spells.
Yeah, so spells are a very big part of Dungeon Keeper. At least they should be to make the easiest experience. One of the creatures that you can attract is a warlock, and the warlock needs a library to come to your dungeon. And once he's there and he's settled and he's made his little house, he will immediately try to go and study, and he'll do some research in the library. And there's basically a set of spells or rooms that you can discover by researching. And every time you do a fresh level, that resets. And specifically for the first chunk of levels, your spell, all the spells that you can research and the rooms you can research are limited. So once you research all that you can for that level, that's it. But there are a lot of rooms and a lot of spells that you can get this way. The first thing that is always researched, I think, is Speed Monster or maybe the Bridge Room.
And also, no, Bridge Room is not something that that you have to research that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that's the first thing that they
yes.
research. I think it's usually Speed Monster and then followed by Bridge, because those are Bridge in particular is one that you want to have because there's a lot of times you have to cross lava or whatever, or water. And there are various reasons why that is very helpful outside of the obvious. But the more warlocks you have in there, the faster stuff will research. And there's a question mark tab on your UI that shows you kind of the progress of your current research. And once that bar fills up, you learn spell or room, and then it starts on the next spell or room. Your library, as you research more spells, it'll create a little spinning icon that is representative of the spell. And if you ever lose that library, you lose that spell as well. And they also take up space. So as you start to get to later levels, you need a bigger library or less people in it. And the higher level, like the people are that are studying in there, the faster the research goes as well. So having a big library with a good chunk of warlocks or wizards or dragons love to research as well.
They do.
Gets your
Now, if you had multiple libraries and you lost one of them, would the spells in that one transfer to the other, or would the other one have to research them all over again?
So the spell icon, spinning book or whatever, that is the spell. So if you lost that room, then you would lose it completely. Oh. And if you sold the tile, I think as you sell tiles of a library, it will scoot the items. But if it runs out of room, then it'll just start getting rid of those books, and you'll have to research those as well.
Yeah, and in terms of researching, often what I do is the first couple things I'd research right away, just throw a level 1 warlock in there. But then I would actually then train them up to maybe like level 3, and then they speed up quite a bit. And a lot of the stuff later on, spells require some significant research, and it just takes forever if they're level 1.
Yeah.
So yeah, allowing them a little bit of time to train up, it can make things go quite a bit faster.
Yeah, and especially usually about maybe 10 minutes or so into a map, things can start to get aggressive as far as the enemy. And by that point, if all you have are level 1 warlocks who have been researching the whole time, it's going to be a tough fight. So balancing that research with the training of them as well is something to take consideration of.
Yeah, so some of the spells you can get are so there's heal, that allows you to heal your own minions. There's of course lightning bolt, which again I didn't know that you could charge up, so it wasn't that great.
Oh, it's amazing.
Often what I'd have to do is like I imagine a level 3 or 4 creature, I just zap them like 20 times with lightning bolt, and they're really hard to hit. You have to basically hit the exact tile they're on, which is is a lot harder than it seems. And so I think probably like if you're just trying to target like one single creature, I feel like I'd hit it like 1 every 5 times. Lobos, did you have any strategy for actually hitting?
Yeah, if you charge it up, the radius gets massive.
Oh,
So
okay.
almost the entire screen visual will get hit with a fully charged lightning bolt, and you can take out huge groups of enemies. If you see like a pile of 10 to 15 level 3 creatures, like 2 lightning bolts just gets rid of them, and it's so good.
Okay.
And the thing about
so that would
well, I was going to say the thing about this game is there is a fog of war as there is in traditional RTS, but once you uncover with a physical creature, you will not lose that fog of war. So you could like suicide run somebody into the middle of their dungeon, and from that point on, you can always have a look into the enemy dungeon and just pick off people here and there. Or to be really mean, you just find like the gems or whatever their money source is, and every couple seconds you can just sit there and pick off all of their imps as they come to mine gold. And
that's awesome.
It just cuts off all their resources.
So let's quickly switch over to some of the other buildings, because I was just using a temple, and as you saw, I combined 3 creatures, or I basically sacrificed 3 creatures, and that combination of creatures produced a horned demon, or a horned reaper, and I immediately threw it into the training room and then slapped it. And he's like, no, I'm not having that.
Oh my gosh.
And so he's just running. He's so angry. He's running all around my dungeon. And so to pacify him, you got to throw him money. But it's actually sometimes very hard to give him money when he's like racing around all your dungeon, right?
Yeah. And especially if they're mad, like sometimes when you're trying to interact with a creature, whether it's give them money or cast a spell on them, they'll like pause in place when you cursor over them. But especially if they're mad or they're busy training or something, they'll just keep moving around. And it's like, come, I'm trying to drop money on you. Take it.
Exactly. So you end up with like piles of gold around him.
Yeah. So the Horned Reaper in particular is the strongest unit that you can get for the kind of your dungeon minions. There is a stronger human minion that you can convert, but that's only only the final level, possibly the second as well. But the Horned Reaper is super picky. He's finicky, and I always build out his own little set of 3x3 tile rooms. I give him a lair, I give him a hatchery, a training room, and then usually like a temple, because if he just runs around in the temple, it makes him happy. But he gets mad if you slap him. He gets mad if he's sleeping. He gets mad if you're not paying him regularly, pretty much. So he's
a big baby.
He's a big baby, and you got to babysit him. But it's worth it, because especially if you get a level 10 Horned Reaper, he is slashed through everything like it's butter.
It's really great, and it's worth noting that each of the minions, when they set up their little home, they have a unique sleeping place, and the Horned Reaper is like this big throne.
Oh yeah,
it's really pretentious, but it's just so perfect. It's great. I love it.
It is. And one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about spells is a spell that you always have by default and is free to cast is Possess Monster, and that is one of the coolest things ever, because you physically possess any creature that you want, and it takes you into a first-person view, and it's dated, so it's very pixely, but creatures will have their own unique viewpoints. Like, for example, if you possess a fly, it's got this like very like multi-segmented kind of lens that it sees through, and you can fly around. Or if you possess a hellhound, he sees in black and white because he's colorblind. Or if you possess a dragon, they've got this big smoky aura around them, and there's varying sizes and speeds to the creatures. Plus, you can play around with all of their spells. And if you're possessing a creature, you're pretty much going to do whatever job they're trying to do much better if you're going about it the right way. You can possess an imp at the beginning of a level and just say, I want to dig south like to this weird section on the map and see if there's a secret there. And you can cast speed on him before or slap him, and you can just dig like nothing, as well as claim territory. So powerful. Possessing is a very powerful tool, but also a super cool piece of flavor that is really endearing to me.
Yeah, you really pointed
I
out
didn't
how
use
well
it
they
all that much.
really point out how well they do the job whenever you're possessing them. There was one level, I think it's the one we're looking at right now on our view here, where I had to take control of a bile demon and go hit doors because we were talking about earlier the AI just wouldn't go do what you want them to do, and I found that by controlling my bile demon and hitting the door, I could take it out in like 3 hits as opposed to waiting 10 seconds for an army to hit the door.
Yeah. Yeah, you will attack manually much faster than a regular enemy would. And for example, the dragons, they have a fire breath, and if it's in game, they'll be like burn, burn, burn. But if you possess it, you can just hold it down, and it's like twice as much damage per second. Yeah, it's ridiculous. One trick that I like to use is bile demons, since they use poison and they fart all the time, they're immune to poison. So there might be a section where you're trying to explore and there are traps and your imps are constantly going in and dying to poison traps. If you take a bile demon and sit him on that poison trap, keep moving off and on it, it will trigger the trap. He won't take any damage, and eventually the trap runs out of charges, and you can continue going from there. Which might be a decent segue into the workshop, because
I was gonna say traps in general, because there's only a couple traps. There's a lightning trap, which will just shoot lightning out. But the one I think I really want to talk about is the boulder trap, because that is the most nefarious. So the other 2 traps that damage creatures, the lightning trap and the poison trap, they will essentially damage creatures. But the creatures sometimes have just so many hit points that it's not very damaging. So like imagine throwing a level 10 bile demon, just truckload of hit points. It can just kind of walk through all those traps. Now the boulder trap does not care about levels or in hit points. It only cares about the number of creatures it's killed, or I think it's also the amount of time it's spent rolling around.
Yeah, it'll eventually break.
Which means if you throw down 10 or 8 level 10 bile demons to bash down a door, and that door triggers a boulder, you've just lost all of your bile demons, and that is sad.
There are some very mean setups where you're like, oh, this is a magic door. Oh, this looks fancy. Like there are different qualities of doors, and the most durable is a magic door. It just looks like a door made of water that's kind of rippling out. And as soon as you break it down, it's like, oh, there's a boulder trap. And if you're not quick on the picking up your creatures, they're just all trounced right there. And that's potentially, level killing disaster to have there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can always get new creatures. The portals will constantly spawn more creatures for you. There is a cap on creatures that you can... you can summon and sort of maintain. So let's say that, and it depends on the level, but let's say that there's a cap of 20 creatures. You can still go over 20 creatures. Again, this isn't counting minions, but actually combative creatures. You can actually use the what Lobos was talking about earlier, which is torturing creatures and having them join your side, or you can have vampires resurrect from the graveyard. And so, you can go over that cap.
Yeah. There's like a soft cap for when creatures will generally stop coming to your dungeon. Otherwise, you would just get a flood of creatures and never stop.
Now, real quick, I want to interject here because Armageddon is just about ready to go off the spell. Did you guys use Armageddon?
I used it on this exact level, and it broke my game. But that was the only time I'd ever experienced this, is I used Armageddon. And I believe the functionality is, well, there's a countdown timer. And then once this countdown timer finishes, it's about 30 seconds. It teleports all creatures to your dungeon heart for a final battle royale. So if you think you have more creatures and you just want to finish the level really quickly, you can just do this. Or if you just want to pit yours against theirs. And once that happens, there's another countdown timer, like 4 or 5 minutes. And once that finishes, I think if you're still alive, you win the level. Is that right?
I'm not sure. I think what it does, though, is it locks you out of picking up creatures. So it's
it does, yes.
Yeah, it's basically you cannot touch your creatures. They are fighting. Have fun. Watch the carnage. And I didn't know what Armageddon did. I just knew that it cost a lot of money. It took a long time to research. And when I first researched it, it said this spell is the ultimate spell. If you think you have a more powerful force, cast it. Have fun. I'm like, I think this is probably that. But yeah. It teleports to the dungeon heart. It's just a massive carnage. It is so much fun.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting, because we haven't really talked about how you win in the game or how you lose. So who wants to talk about that?
So I'm very knowledgeable on what happens when I lose. So I got knocked out a few times, but really what it is I didn't let them kill me all the way, but they get in, they take out your dungeon heart, and to win, you take out their dungeon heart. It really just seemed it really seemed to me almost MOBA-y in the goal.
Right. So,
yeah. It's actually there's two. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say the other way is either you defeat all of the enemy keepers by destroying their dungeon heart, or in certain levels there are only heroes, and you defeat waves of heroes until finally the Lord of the Land approaches, who's the Lord of the Land, the knight character of the hero faction. And he's a strong guy. He's almost like Horned Reaper equivalent. And he'll usually be accompanied by another group of heroes. They'll make their way to your dungeon, or maybe you've already found where they spawn, because there are hero portals out in the world, this kind of wavy looking mirror type portal, and you can just drop all your creatures on them. But it's usually not too hard. If you've made it that far in the level, as long as you've got like your big creatures left, then you can take them out pretty easily.
Yeah. So we're actually coming up on some of the last levels here, and I want to pivot on over to the last level itself, and we should be getting to it in just a minute. But the last level I wanted to spend some time talking about, because I think this level really helps to illustrate what makes Dungeon Keeper challenging, and when you remove certain elements from Dungeon Keeper, how much more challenging the game is.
Yeah.
So the way that Dungeon Keeper traditionally works, Lobos mentioned you can take you can possess one of your minions and kind of let him through a terror, pillage and terror your enemy, right? But often what you want to do is you want to use your imps to claim portions of their dungeon to basically allow you the ability to use those almost as like forward operating bases, where you're like, all right, I know that I can drop a bunch of reinforcements, one or two rooms behind where my main attack force is, right? But in order to actually claim those areas, you need to have one contiguous path of terrain,
right,
or a bridge from point A to point B. So for instance, in the last level, there is a large moat that is physically separating any of your level from any of their level. And that becomes very difficult because it means you cannot actually start claiming their territory. What you have to do is actually, and there's no bridges. For some reason in this specific one, they do not start you out with a bridge.
Okay.
And so you can't actually bridge into their area. Now what we're seeing here is actually the last little bit of the level in which you do have a bridge. So what happens is there's a very strong enemy force. And once you take them out, you find the Avatar of the Land, and he is imprisoned. And so you fight him, and what I actually did is I actually knocked him out and tried to take his body.
Mm-hmm.
But if you try to kill him, his body decomposes, and the little narrator's like, "What's this? The Avatar has disappeared." And so you're like, "Well, that's kind of weird." And a little bit later, he comes back and he says, "The Avatar is alive, and he is attacking your dungeon heart, and he comes in with just like a swath of level 10 creatures, like really, really devastating. Now, I had built up tons of traps around where I knew they were going to spawn, so I made things a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But this level is really interesting because you have four nodes of gold that are gems. Gems never run out of gold. In all situations other than the gems, like the gold that you mined is a one-time consumable. So there are situations where you could basically run out of money and not be able to win a match, right? But anytime you have the gems, that's basically, hey, that's free infinite money. And so I was dealing with upwards of 1 million gold.
Yeah.
And what I was doing was just like using that gold to burn through and try to, damage my enemies because it was very hard to get to them. And also in this level, I use heavy use of the scavenging room and the temple. And those sort of counteract each other. Lobos, did you understand how those work?
The scavenging room, if you have a creature and the enemy has that same creature, if your creature is higher level, you can actually just steal it from the other side. So if I have a level 10 Dark Mistress and there are level 5s and 7s in control of the enemy, you can put her in your level 10 into the scavenging room, and it costs money just like a training room periodically. And it's a very expensive room on its own. But you'll actually just suddenly pull them into your dungeon, and they become your minions. And that can be very powerful if you know what the enemy has. Really just turn the tide because, well, yeah, taking one away from them, adding one to you, just makes you that much more powerful. In the temple... Well, you go on with what you were going to say about the temple.
I was just going to say the temple is the way you counteract that from happening with you.
Ah, okay. I did not remember that part of it.
Yeah. So if let's say Lobos, because there is actually multiplayer, which I didn't play. This game wouldn't really interest me in a multiplayer way. Maybe just like a casual match with some friends. In any case, let's say Lobos and I were playing together. Lobos had a level 10 Dark Mistress, and I had, let's say, 2 level 5 Dark Mistresses. What I could do is I put those both into my temple, and that sort of like creates a shield and blocks the scavenging attempt. Now, the scavenging that Lobos is doing actually does cost him money, and it's actually more money than training.
Yeah.
So it's not, unless you have infinite money, there is a cost to incur there. But in this specific level, I actually found that very troublesome because what was happening was they had a ton of level 10 vampires in their scavenging room. And so my imps, I would, have a small little battle and I would resurrect a vampire. Because what happens is the imps will take the deceased bodies and move them to the graveyard. They decompose, and then they will spawn a vampire, level 1 vampire. And it would immediately get scavenged because my level in the temple was not high enough to actually like create that shield. So I could never actually. I basically had to stop getting vampires because I was essentially just feeding them new vampires, and then they would train those level 10 vampires. So it was a mess. So I was like, how do I just beat these guys here? So it was a very, very long and arduous process. It was a lot of like baiting their creatures out, trying to steal one of their level 10 creatures, and then interrogating them. And you can sit there and heal them over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
And when they're being tortured. And that means you have a higher chance of them actually converting. Because, if they die while being tortured, they'll turn into, I think, a ghost, right?
Yes.
Or is it a skeleton?
While being tortured, it's a ghost. If they die in the prison, like starving to death, then it's a skeleton.
Yeah. Also, we're almost out of time here, but it is kind of worth mentioning quickly that skeletons really hate bile demons. And so your enemies, your minions will actually attack each other as they like there's certain enemies that just do not, or minions that don't get
they don't get along. Yeah.
Like the flies. I think flies and beetles are one, right?
Flies and beetles are okay. I think flies and spiders don't get along.
Yeah, that's right. Flies and spiders.
And also
spiders early in the
demons.
game they were fighting, and I was like, why are you two fighting? Just separate each other, and they would go right back at it.
Before we totally wrap up, I did want to mention that there are some really cool things you can do. In certain levels, there are what are called dungeon secrets, and they're little hidden kind of spiky power-ups, and they have a lot of different effects. Some can increase all of your minions' level by 1. Some of them can resurrect a creature who's died. Sometimes you can transfer one creature to the next level. But possibly the most interesting thing is there are hidden levels that you can unlock, and then they're really like kind of mini game secret levels. The first one is probably the hardest one, and that is it's almost like a first-person RPG because you're not allowed to do any building, and you start with one dragon, I think, and all you can do is possess him and just start walking through kind of a maze-like level with him, and you have to fight some enemies, and then eventually, after several rooms, you'll find a neutral Dark Mistress, I think is the next one. And then you can possess the Dark Mistress and you go through the next part. And then there's a vampire. And so it's a really different way to play the game, but using the systems. And I thought that was super ingenious. And then the other one...
That is so cool. Yeah, I didn't find that one.
Oh, yeah. And the only other one I'll mention is really funny where there's 2 levels like this where you start off and you have like 40 imps and that's it. And it says... These imps have become corrupted. You need to defeat them all in like 3 minutes. And you're like, oh gosh, what do I do? So you can slap your imps to kill them. You can dig to certain spots in the level and unleash enemies that will come and kill the imps. Ultimately, the strategy I went with was drop a couple on this bridge in front of the lava, slap them into the lava, and just keep slapping them, and that would kill them. It's kind of a sadistic level, but
oh, nice.
But
that level, I did play that one. That one was awesome. Nice. There's some boulders that you can unleash, and that will kill about 5 imps there. Yeah. The only other secret level I found was called Full Moon, I believe. And it is accessible only during a full moon. Oh. And it's really kind of cool.
Yeah, there's also one that only shows up on a certain day, I think. So if you change your system clock, then it'll actually show up and you can do it.
Oh, that's
so much
cool.
Interesting depth here. And I'm surprised, maybe I say this every episode, but I'm always surprised at how much we can talk about it. And I feel like we could easily go another hour.
Yeah, man. Every creature has so much detail. You can just go on and on, but... Yeah,
and there's even some buildings we didn't even talk about. Like I don't think we talked about the barracks.
No, there's so many rooms. Yeah, like we didn't talk about the workshop very much. Like trolls, orcs. There's so much to it.
The barracks.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
still really worth picking up. You might actually find that you have this game for free on some of your various, like either GOG.com or Origin. Like I feel like so many services give this game out for free. So check out your account, see if you've got it, and maybe download the Keeper FX mod if you want to play. Still holds up today, I think. Closing thoughts here. Maybe start with Alamaxia.
Like we keep saying, the depth of this game is unreal, especially for being 1997. The graphics are with the mod it is much better. I'm gonna be going back to this game to finish it. This is every game we play is always more fun than I expect it to be, and this one I think surprised me the most. So I very much recommend this to anyone out there who likes RTSs.
Yeah, Dungeon Keeper is just one of my favorites. I play it every couple years for the past 20 years or so. And, it's a shame that there hasn't been any sort of remake or continuation of the IP. There is a Dungeon Keeper 2. They made a mobile game. There's also a spiritual successor called War for the Overworld, which is pretty recent, and I've heard very good things. I haven't gotten to touch it myself, but...
There's also one I think called Dungeons, and they even have like up to Dungeons 3.
Oh, okay, yeah. I haven't played that either.
I tried it out a little bit. It didn't quite hit the mark, but it might be worth checking out at some point. Well, there you have it. That is the end credits there of Dungeon Keeper, and a big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters for this episode. If you enjoy this show and you want to help support us, you can head on over to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Gaming Show to learn more.
What game are we going to be playing next?
So next we've got oh man, this one is tugs at my heartstrings. It's a super, super long game, but I remember picking it up when I was like 16 and sinking so many hours into it as my parents had finally bought me a computer to have in my room. We're going to be playing Might and Magic 6, The Mandate of Heaven. And I think this is a easily 60-hour-ish game, so quite an investment. Lobos, I think you might be actually streaming it quite a bit here. Is that correct?
I'm going to be doing it on Mondays. We'll see if I need to do some more outside of that or how far I can manage to get. But I'm definitely going to put in a bunch of time.
That's cool. I think once you kind of get the ends, you get your hang of the game, sink its claws into you. There's a lot of really cool things to explore. A lot of interesting dungeons, and I don't want to talk about it too much. Although, with only an hour to talk about, man, you thought this one was hard to talk about in only an hour. Imagine trying to sink 60 hours in.
Oh, boy.
Or whatever. So that will be our episode in August. So stay tuned for that one. Well, sadly, we have reached the end credits of this episode, and we wanted to thank everyone for listening to us on the podcast.
We release a new podcast monthly, so be sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google, or whatever your platform of choice is.
And if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email at SaturdayMorningGamingShow@gmail.com.
Or follow us on Twitter at SaturdayMGaming.
And a special shout out to TechnoAxe for the intro music on this episode.
For Saturday Morning Gaming, I'm Alamaxia.
And I'm Lobos.
And I'm the Fat Wizard. We'll see you in August with Might and Magic 6, The Mandate of Heaven.